All right, welcome to another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're tackling something I know a lot of you have been curious about. Multilingual large language models.
Yeah, these are fascinating.
These are the AI brains behind so many things we use every day, like chatbots and translation tools. We're going to be dissecting a research paper today.
Okay.
It's called Do Multilingual LLMs Think in English?
Ooh, that's a good one.
And trust me, the findings are mind-bending.
It really makes you question what's happening under the hood of these AI systems. We think they're so smart.
Right.
The paper explores this idea that even when LLMs are generating text in other languages, like, say, Mandarin or Spanish,
Right.
they might actually be relying on English as a kind of internal stepping stone.
So even though they're trained on these massive data sets of all these different languages, there might be a hidden English-first process going on.
That's exactly the hypothesis. And to test it, the researchers used a really interesting technique called the Logit Lens. It's this way of peeking into the LLM's decision-making process as it generates text.
So if we imagine like the LLM is writing a sentence in French,
Okay.
the Logit Lens lets us see which words or concepts it's considering at each step.
Exactly. And what we found was that often the LLM will first select the English word for a concept,
Really?
even if the final output is supposed to be in French.
So it's like the LLM is thinking, okay, I need the word for, I don't know, happiness?
Uh-huh.
Happiness. How do I say that in French? Bonheur.
Precisely. And this tendency, it was especially strong in smaller LLMs.
Okay.
Or those that were trained on less diverse language data.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. If an LLM has mostly been exposed to English, it's more likely to fall back on it as a default.
Right, exactly. It seems like the sheer volume of English content that is used in AI training might be creating a kind of cognitive bias within these models.
But why does this matter? Is this just a quirky thing about how LLMs work, or are there, like, real-world consequences to this?
I think there are. I mean, think about it. If LLMs are constantly running everything through this English filter, it could impact how accurate they are in other languages
Okay.
and how fluent they sound.
They might produce translations that are technically correct but sound a bit off or unnatural.
Exactly. And it could have, deeper implications for things like cultural understanding
Uh-huh.
and bias. If an LLM is always defaulting to English ways of thinking, it might miss out on subtle nuances of other languages and cultures.
So the research looked at a few different LLMs, right?
Yes.
Were they all equally English-centric?
Well, there was some variation. They looked at 4 open-source LLMs: Llama, Gemma, Aya, and Mixtral. And Gemma, which was trained primarily on English data, that one showed the strongest English-first tendencies.
So the more diverse the training data, the less likely an LLM is to get stuck in this English rut.
That seems to be the case.
Okay.
Aya, for example, was trained on a broader range of languages, and it showed less reliance on English.
That's encouraging.
It is encouraging.
It suggests that with more balanced training data, we might be able to develop LLMs that are truly multilingual.
That's the hope. But the researchers didn't just observe this English-first behavior, they actually tried to manipulate it.
Intriguing.
Yeah.
How do they do that?
They used a technique called steering. It involves using these special things called steering vectors to kind of nudge the LLM's output in a certain direction.
Steering vectors. That sounds pretty technical.
It does.
Can you break it down for me a little bit?
Sure. Think of it this way. A steering vector is like a set of guidelines
Okay.
that subtly influences what the LLM generates. So, for example, a joy steering vector might encourage the LLM to produce more upbeat or positive text.
So it's a way of shaping the LLM's creative output.
Exactly. And here's the fascinating part.
Okay.
They found that these steering vectors were more effective when they were based on English words, even when the LLM was supposed to be generating text in a different language.
Hold on. So even when you're trying to guide the LLM in, say, Spanish, it's more responsive to cues based on English?
That's right. This provides further evidence that English plays this privileged role in the LLM's internal world.
So we've got these multilingual LLMs, but they seem to be thinking in English more than we realized.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to generating meaningful content.
Yeah.
This could have big implications for how accurate and fair these AI models are.
Absolutely. And we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to unpack in this research.
I'm ready.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve deeper into how LLMs handle factual information across different languages.
I can't wait. Welcome back. Last time we were talking about multilingual LLMs and their surprising tendency to rely on English even when they're working with other languages.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really challenges our assumptions about how these AI systems process language.
Yeah.
And this time we're going to explore how LLMs handle factual information across different languages.
Okay, so if an LLM knows that Tokyo is the capital of Japan in English,
Right.
does it store that same fact separately in its Japanese brain?
Right.
Or is there something else going on?
That's a great question. The researchers tackled this
Yeah.
by using a data set of simple facts.
Okay.
Like the capital of France is Paris,
Uh-huh.
translated into multiple languages.
Clever. So they could test whether the LLM was accessing the same underlying fact, regardless of which language it was presented in?
Exactly. And they used a technique called causal tracing to see which parts of the LLM's neural network lit up when processing these facts.
So like a little spotlight revealing the specific neurons involved in remembering that Berlin is the capital of Germany.
Precisely. And what they found is that the same regions of the LLM's brain were activated whether the fact was presented in English, French, German, or Dutch.
So that suggests that the knowledge itself is stored in a language-independent way. It's like the LLM has a single fact database
Right.
that it can access in any language.
That seems to be the case. But here's where it gets interesting.
Okay?
Remember how we talked about those English steering vectors being more effective?
Yeah?
Well, this seems to contradict the idea of a universal fact database.
Right.
Because if the facts are stored the same way, regardless of language, shouldn't steering work equally well in any language?
That's a really good point. It seems counterintuitive.
Right, and this is where we see the nuance of this whole English-first tendency.
Okay.
While the facts themselves might be stored universally,
Uh-huh.
the way the LLM accesses and processes those facts seems to be influenced by this English bias.
So the LLM knows the fact in any language, but it prefers to take the English route to get there.
It seems that way. Think of it like a library,
Okay.
where all the books are organized using the English alphabet. You can find a book in any language, but the system for finding it is inherently English-based.
That's an interesting analogy. So how did they test this access bias?
So they took the internal representation of the same fact in two different languages and blended them together. So imagine taking the LLM's French representation of Paris as the capital of France
Uh-huh.
and slowly morphing it into the English representation of the same fact.
So a kind of linguistic crossfade from French to English?
Exactly. And as they did this, they found that the LLM was more likely to answer in English, even when the blended representation was closer to the other language.
So even when you're playing with the LLM's internal language settings, it keeps gravitating back to English. That's a strong bias.
It really highlights the importance of understanding how these language models are thinking if we want to create AI that's fair and accurate across all languages. But it's important to remember that not all LLMs showed this bias to the same degree.
Right. We talked about how Aya, the model trained on the more diverse dataset, was less reliant on English. Did that hold true in these experiments as well?
Yes, Aya was more balanced in its language output during these blending experiments, showing the potential benefits of diverse training data.
That's a hopeful sign. It seems the more languages an LLM is exposed to, the less likely it is to default to English.
Precisely. But it also shows that we need to be very intentional about how we train these models if we want them to be truly multilingual.
This English-first tendency isn't just a quirky side effect. It has real implications for how these LLMs understand information and how that might impact their use in the real world.
Absolutely. It raises questions about bias, fairness, and the potential for misunderstandings.
So why should we as regular people who aren't AI researchers
Yeah.
be concerned about how an LLM thinks?
Well, LLMs are becoming integrated into so many aspects of our lives, from chatbots to translation tools to search engines. Understanding their limitations and potential biases is really crucial if we want to make sure that these technologies are used responsibly and don't accidentally reinforce existing inequalities.
It's like we need to make sure the AIs are speaking everyone's language, literally and figuratively.
Well said. And there's another interesting aspect of this research.
Okay.
They didn't just analyze individual words.
Uh-huh.
They also looked at how LLMs handled different parts of speech across languages.
Oh, like whether verbs are more likely to be processed in English than, say, adjectives.
Yes, and they found that LLMs were more likely to use English when processing nouns, verbs, and adjectives, the words that carry the core meaning of a sentence. But when it came to grammatical elements, like conjunctions, prepositions, and articles, they were more likely to stick to the target language.
So it's like the LLM is saying, okay, I need the English word for dog, but I can handle and or d in Spanish just fine.
Exactly. This suggests that LLMs might be developing different internal mechanisms for handling different types of linguistic information.
Fascinating. Like their brains are compartmentalizing language, with some areas more English dominant than others.
And that could have implications for how we design and train LLMs in the future. Maybe we need to focus on strengthening their ability to handle grammatical structures in other languages rather than just feeding them more vocabulary.
So to create truly multilingual AI, we need to go beyond just teaching these models more words. We need to help them understand the nuances of grammar and syntax across different languages.
You got it. And there's one last fascinating finding from this research we need to discuss. They found that the English first bias was even more noticeable when looking at the representation of abstract concepts within the LLM.
Abstract concepts, you mean things like freedom or justice rather than concrete objects?
Exactly. The research indicates that LLMs, especially the smaller ones or those trained on less diverse data, tend to rely heavily on the English representation of these abstract concepts,
Okay.
even when they're supposed to be thinking in a different language.
So it's like they translate the entire concept of freedom into English
Uh-huh.
before trying to understand it in, say, Chinese.
Precisely. And this could have big implications for how LLMs perform complex reasoning tasks
Right.
or engage in conversations that require a deep understanding of nuanced ideas.
It seems like if an LLM is constantly filtering abstract ideas through an English lens, it could miss out on the subtleties of how those concepts are understood in other languages and cultures.
You're absolutely right. It would be like trying to understand the concept of Ubuntu by translating it to humanity. You might capture the general idea, but you'll miss out on the layers of meaning specific to the original concept.
So even if LLMs can translate words and sentences accurately, they might not be truly grasping the deeper, more abstract ideas behind human communication.
That's a key takeaway from this research. It highlights the need for more sophisticated AI training that goes beyond linguistic fluency to cultivate a deeper understanding of how culture and philosophy shape our language and how we express complex ideas.
The pursuit of truly multilingual AI isn't just about expanding vocabulary or perfecting grammar. It's about bringing the gap between different ways of thinking and knowing.
Well said. But we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to uncover.
I can't wait. We're back for the final part of our deep dive into multilingual LLMs. It's been a wild ride so far. We've learned about their surprising reliance on English, even when they're working with other languages, and how that bias might affect everything from translation accuracy to their understanding of abstract concepts.
It really makes you think about the challenges of creating AI that can truly grasp the nuances of human language. And this final part is all about zooming out and looking at the bigger picture.
Okay, so let's get philosophical for a moment. What does it actually mean for an AI to think in a particular language? Is it simply processing words and grammar, or is there something more profound happening?
That's a question that's been debated for ages, even before AI came into the picture. But when it comes to these language models, it raises questions about consciousness, cultural sensitivity,
Yeah.
the machines can truly understand different worldviews.
So are we simply creating AIs that are good at mimicking human language? Or are we on the path to developing machines that can truly comprehend and engage with diverse cultures and perspectives?
That's the core issue, isn't it? And this research suggests that true multilingual thinking and AI might be further away than we thought.
Hmm.
If LLMs are consistently relying on English as a kind of universal translator,
Right.
they could be missing out on the subtle ways that language shapes our understanding of the world.
It's as if they're looking at everything through English-tinted glasses, even when they're speaking Mandarin or Arabic.
Exactly. And that could have unforeseen consequences, from biased translations to misinterpretations in cross-cultural communication.
So what can we do about this? How do we move toward creating AIs that are truly multilingual, not just in terms of fluency, but in their ability to think and reason across different languages and cultures?
Well, the research highlights that simply feeding LLMs more data isn't enough. We need to develop new training approaches that encourage them to learn and represent language in a more nuanced and culturally sensitive way.
So instead of just expanding their vocabulary, we need to help understand the deeper cultural and philosophical context behind the words they're using.
Precisely. It's about shifting from translation to true understanding.
That sounds like a huge challenge, but it seems essential if we want to build AI that can genuinely connect with humans on a deeper level.
It is a major challenge, but this research is a critical step in the right direction. It helps us see the limitations of current AI systems and points us towards a future where machines can think and communicate in a truly multilingual way.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the fascinating world of multilingual LLMs. We've discovered that these AI models are far more intricate than we might have imagined, and that their thinking processes are full of surprises.
It's true.
It really is. And this research leaves us with a thought-provoking question. Can we develop LLMs that are genuinely multilingual, free from the dominance of any one language? Or will English remain the default language of AI? It's something to ponder as these technologies become increasingly woven into our lives. As we continue to develop and interact with these powerful AI tools, it's crucial to keep asking these critical questions, challenge assumptions, and strive for a future where machines can truly grasp and celebrate the incredible diversity of human language and thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.